SO Marketers, who bring you last-minute NBC news pictures, present highlights of memorable news stories televised during 1946 by your SO reporter. America's Secretary of State James F. Burns en route to the Paris Peace Conference. President Truman motored to Washington's National Airport to see him off. In an atmosphere charged with the significance of his momentous mission, Mr. Burns took with him the hopes of generations to come. As America's #1 peace envoy boarded the presidential plane, said goodbye to his commander-in-chief, no one knew better than he the obstacles that lay ahead. Mr. Truman waved a cheerful bon voyage as the powerful motors of the famous Sacred Cow nosed the big ship out upon her epical journey. America's bid for peace in our time, a memorable scene from the pages of 1946. Summoned by the Big Four's foreign ministers to historico Luxembourg Palace, in the heart of the French capital, delegates of 21 nations came from the 4 quarters of the globe. The streets of Paris that twice have known the tramp of German boots now welcome the men who came to write a lasting peace. NBC newsreel cameramen, operating for the first time on an international scope, filmed the dramatic highlights of the gathering of a new League of Nations. Filmed scenes that were rushed to New York by air and broadcast by television in a matter of hours. The arrival of Molotov, the Soviet foreign minister. The appearance of dapper Jimmy Burns walking with brisk step as though eager to get to the task ahead. The coming of Clement Attlee, Prime Minister of Great Britain, all bent upon the common cause, the safeguarding of civilization itself. With hope and optimism, the peace envoys heard the President of France, Georges Bidault, open the conference. And now the same Bidault, heroic leader of French resistance during the war, has given way to the government of Leon Blum. For 13 weeks, the conference argued and debated the clauses that should be written into the peace treaties. Mr. Molotov, mouthpiece of the Kremlin, played the dominant role. For uppermost in every mind was, what does Russia want? Upon this answer seemed to hang the success or failure of all efforts for understanding. Australia's Herbert Evatt emerged as a champion of small nations, bluntly told the world that the rights of minorities must be respected. Mr. Burns reaffirmed America's adherence to the principle of the 4 freedoms of the Atlantic Charter. And as the discussions drifted into the fall of 1946, mankind sadly reflected upon the paradox of human nature, how nations united in bloody war should find it so difficult to achieve that same unity in the cause of peace. New York in 1946 saw RAF Lancasters over Manhattan, the first mass flight overseas since Italy's late Marshal Balbo led his armada to this country in 1933. Veterans of more than 50 missions over Nazi Germany, the huge 4-motored Lanks landed at Mitchell Field. 16 of Britain's biggest bombers playing a post-war call on their former comrades, the AAF. Began the first of a series of goodwill visits that took them to California and back before returning to England. To the 207 officers and men of Squadron 35, New York said welcome. To their commander, 23-year-old Alan Craig, youngest squadron leader in the RAF, New York said, well done. October 1946 saw a more familiar envoy of goodwill enter New York Harbor. The Queen Elizabeth making her maiden peacetime voyage after 6 years' duty as a troop ship. Transporting nearly 1 million men overseas, the giant 83,000-ton vessel received an ovation worthy of her record, and New York never looked better to her 2,241 passengers. Flagship of the Cunard fleet, the Queen Elizabeth represents Britain's first great bid for the return of post-war trade. This voyage marked the beginning of a new era in the annals of British maritime history. "1946 saw New York, long accustomed to welcoming world celebrities, extend a traditional City Hall reception to the latest newcomer to the ranks of the Big Four. Ernest Bevin, Foreign Minister of Great Britain, here with his wife to receive the keys to the city. Long a champion of the working classes, 65-year-old Ernest Bevin heads not only one of the world's largest labor unions, but is one of the rare new figures now shaping the course of the British Empire. "37 floors above Manhattan's Park Avenue, in the palatial suite of the Waldorf Astoria's President Lucius Boomer, foreign ministers of the Big Four met for the first time in the United States. Most of the faces are familiar. France's Deputy Foreign Minister, Mr. Molotov and his deputy, Mr. Wyszynski. Their concessions broke a series of deadlocks. Mr. Burns representing the American Department of State, with Senators Vandenberg and Connolly. 33 times during 1945, the foreign ministers had met at the conference table. Now major accomplishments: peace treaties written for the Axis satellites, American principles of atomic control accepted. Hope is on the horizon. In Washington, the parade of a Japanese-American combat team was reviewed by President Truman. Summoned to the nation's capital, these heroic Nisi had won more citations than any single unit during the war. Now lined up before their commander-in-chief, men who have given more than a full measure of their loyalty heard the president speak with simple eloquence.
To be able to put the 7th Regimental Citation on your banners today, you're to be congratulated on what you've done for this great country of ours. I think it was my predecessor who said that Americanism is not a matter of birth or creed. It's a matter of the heart. Citizenship in this great republic of ours means much more than race or creed or religion. You fought for the liberties of the world along with the rest of us. I congratulate you on that, and I can't tell you how very much I appreciate the privilege of being able to show you just how much the United States of America thinks of what you've done. You're now on your way home. You fought not only the enemy, but you fought prejudice, and you've won. Keep up that fight, and we'll continue to win to make this great republic stand for just what its Constitution says it stands for: the welfare of all the people, all the time. Bring forward the colors.
This dramatic salute by the President of the United States, truly one of the memorable news pictures of 1946. In the arrival of John L. Lewis at Washington's Criminal Courts building, the nation saw its government finally cracking down on the dictatorial demands of its labor leaders. For in a year marked by the greatest and most crippling strikes in all its history, the people looked to Washington for decisive action. The year's 110 million lost working days could never be regained, but the nation wanted assurance that the strikes would not continue, that there would be relief from the spreading economic unrest. As head of the vital soft coal workers, John L. Lewis held much of the answer. Emerging with a $3.5 million fine levied on his union and $10,000 against Lewis personally, the labor leader bowed before his first defeat in many a year. Wallace is fired, the headlines screamed less than 2 weeks before elections. And with that blunt announcement, Henry Wallace passed from the White House scene, last of the left-wing Democrats in the president's cabinet. His outspoken criticism of America's foreign policy, embarrassing to Mr. Burns in Paris, brought about his downfall. Wallace, the man who might have been president, was asked to resign. As Secretary of Agriculture, Vice President, then Secretary of Commerce, Wallace was the avowed champion of the common man, his departure under fire one of the memorable news pictures of 1946. "1946 saw the British Chief of Staff, Field Marshal Montgomery, visit West Point. NBC sound cameras recorded his first message to America.
This is my first visit to the United States, and I'm very glad to be here. I think it's very appropriate that I, being a soldier, should make my first visit in the States to this military academy. And it's been a very great honor indeed to be able to speak to the cadets of this academy. Thank you very much.
With General Collins and General Taylor, superintendent of the academy, Montgomery took the salute as the Corps of Cadets passed in regimental review. Tendered a memento of his visit, the West Point yearbook, Britain's first soldier proved a thrilling inspiration to America's future generals. "1946 saw the SS America, queen of the nation's merchant marine, steam into New York Harbor, ready to enter peacetime service on the North Atlantic. Biggest, fastest, and most luxurious passenger liner ever built in this country, the America was given a typical New York reception as she arrived completely refitted and overhauled. NBC's aerial cameraman brought back memorable scenes of the big ship, scenes which were broadcast by your SO reporter that same evening. Formerly the Army Transport West Point, the America is the nation's newest bid for the blue ribbon of the Atlantic. A 5-alarm fire on the New York waterfront gave NBC television one of its most sensational news beats of the year. The old Staten Island ferry terminal, ablaze at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, threatened to engulf the entire area. Navy men from nearby ships aided firemen from 5 boroughs. Aboard police boats and a chartered tug, NBC newsreel cameramen were among the first on the scene, brought back spectacular pictures of the blaze at its height. Almost a disaster of major proportions, the fire swept the rail terminal, burning far into the following day. While New Yorkers were still reading the story in newspapers, NBC television flashed first pictures on the screen a few hours after the first alarm. Television, the news world's newest baby, was growing up. 1946 saw television's own newsreel cameras out in the mid-Pacific. Bikini, heart of the Marshall Islands. Bikini, core of Operation Crossroads. This tiny atoll, scene of the greatest scientific test of all time. Here, the United States Navy conducted experiments to determine the value of its fleet as a weapon of defense. Batteries of automatic cameras, some encased in steel towers, were focused on the lagoon. Here were anchored once proud carriers and battleships, ships now doomed for death. Saratoga, Nevada, Prince Eugen, transports and freighters. Aboard the flagship Mount McKinley, observers and scientists, news and radio correspondents gathered with Admiral Blandy, Chief of Operations. Aboard the Appalachian, 100 newsreel cameras awaited the tense, dramatic moment of contact. Roy Phelps recording the scene for television, the first blast. A new atomic bomb, more powerful than its three predecessors, was being launched upon a world that watched and wondered, what next? Filmed from different angles, each explosion seemed more earth-shattering than the other. The fifth bomb detonated underwater, the most spectacular of all. Huge ships faintly visible on the horizon bobbed about like toys. Again, man's ingenuity has written a flaming chapter across the sky for all the world to see. Whether this mighty force we have unleashed will be for evil, or whether it will be harnessed for peace and good, time alone will tell. Today, not only is the atom bomb the most memorable news picture of 1946, history will record it perhaps as the greatest thing man has ever seen. Highlights of memorable NBC television news pictures of 1946 was brought to you with the compliments of your nearby Esso dealer, who reminds you that happy motoring starts at the Esso sign.